Good Monday to everyone. Welcome to the Light Gate. We are coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We are on Roku, YouTube, Facebook, and many other platforms. We have a very interesting guest tonight, and I just want to let you know that on the radio you can't see our pictures, but we will identify them to you as well as we can. I would also like to announce happy birthday, Preston, and I'm going to turn it over to him now. Go, Preston.
Thank you, Dolly. Yeah, I can't believe I'm now 50-something. Yeah, sliding soon into my 60s, but it's all good. I still feel like a little boy inside, so it's fun. Thank you, Dolly. That was very sweet of you. All right, guys. Yeah, thank you for joining us again on The Light Gate. This is episode 54. That makes it a full year now, 52 weeks in a year, so over a year. Very excited about that. We actually survived. We're doing pretty well. Our producers are pretty happy with us, I think. So, yeah, we're just trucking right along. Excuse me. Just getting over a little bit of a cold, so please forgive me. All right. Yeah, we have a great guest today. But as you know, before I like to bring our guest in, I like to just say hi to all you folks here, because it's because of you we do this show and have so much fun each week. And it's such a delight to see the same faces and names joining us, and of course, new ones as well. So, oh my goodness, here's Egyptian princess. I believe it's someone's birthday. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be embarrassed tonight. I just princess. Hello, Brian. Thanks for joining us. Oh, Susan Alloway. Thank you so much. Yes, going to have carrot cake. So, yay. Louise, thank you very much for joining us and for the well wishes. And Aussie Jen, oh, thank you so much for the generous super chat, Aussie Jen, and for the birthday wishes. And you too, Dolly, thank you. Hello, Rotary Motion and J.R. Amadeus Schiffer. Yes, Dolly is feeling much better. So thank you, and namaste. Thank you for the birthday wishes. And yeah, Dolly's birthday is in 2 days, so happy birthday to you, Dolly. Pre-birthday. Because we can't do it live on the show. Namaste. Oh my gosh, your endless generosity. I am humbled and delighted. Your goodwill and generosity is just so awesome to see. Really warms my heart. So thank you. Always awesome to see you here too. Fun Talks TV and Michael Kennedy is bringing the popcorn as he always does. Thank you. And we have Jacques Dion, who says, wonderful guest tonight. Yes, Kathleen Marden. Oh, all the way from Montreal, Quebec. I suppose you can speak French then. Well, I wish I could understand it. I can speak it a little bit. But...
He speaks a lot. He speaks it very well.
All right. Louise, thank you. You guys are so nice. Really appreciate that, Louise. Thank you. And Josephine McKinnon, good morning from the land of Oz. Boy, it's already May 7th there. So she's time traveling from down under. Very cool. Catherine Fourfeathers, hello. And nice big crowd today. Very cool. Hector Gonzalez, hello. All the way from Queens, New York City. Very cool. Mr. E, happy birthday. Gachibas, clap. Nice. Thank you. Hi, W. Decker. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the super chat and Dolly's feel better wishes and my birthday wishes. Thank you. And who else we have here? Mountain Dan from Tennessee. And C. Golden and Allison Carr. Thank you for joining us and thank you for the happy birthday wishes. And Frag G, another Aussie and a double Taurus. Ah, cool. Probably means you're stubborn as both Dolly and I.
Uh-huh.
All right, Jenny Lynn. Yeah, Dolly was feeling unwell, but definitely on the mend. And thank you for the birthday wishes. And Jay Truth Seeker. Yeah, it is Paola Harris's birthday. I sent her a little birthday wish.
That is. Happy birthday. Yeah.
Okay, who else? Cyberspace. Hello. And Olivia. Thank you very much. And Linda Catlett. My goodness, we do have a big group today, Dolly. I'm going to have to wrap this up pretty quick. KM and Tweet Scotchy. I love that. Very nice. And Janet and Dave and Pamela. So reminds me a little bit of Romper Room, if you remember that. Eyes to See and Robert Hamley and Louise. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Brilliant Design and Pamela Jesse and oh my goodness, Star Orchid. I'm going to get in trouble, but I'm going to keep going, Dolly. Just a few more. Maria, hello. All the way from Kalispell, Montana. Brilliant Design. And Henry Jackson and Hidden Sky Machines and Yvonne Smith. Very cool. Hi, Yvonne. Who else do we got here? Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm just going to have to get started because there's so many people joining us tonight. Must be you, Kathleen, because our crowd is not normally quite this big. All the way from Sweden. Dolly, say something in Swedish.
I do. Hässlinge.
Jagalaska dig.
Jag älskar det. That's what I'm trying to say. Jag älskar det. I love it. Yeah.
And Grateful Ones, thank you. And Shelley Chamberlain, thank you so much. And the Troll Gobble and Roland Powers. Okay, let's just get started, guys. It's time. I'm spending too much time on comments. And when we have such a wonderful guest, it's really time to start with our show. And yes, tonight I'm super excited. This is someone I've been following forever. And if you're anyone with any interest in this field, in this subject, you've probably heard of our guest. Her name is Kathleen Marden. She is actually the niece of Betty Hill, but she's an iconic figure in this field in her own right, for sure. In fact, she's the author of many books. Well, let me just get into her bio. She is an author, researcher, and experiencer. We're super lucky to have her on tonight because her interest in UFOs and ETs began in 1961 when her aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill, had a close encounter in New Hampshire's White Mountains, as I'm sure you've heard about. Now, as a family member, Kathleen, of course, had firsthand knowledge of their encounter on the day they arrived home, and 2 days later, they actually visited the Hills' home. So Kathleen has devoted years to painstaking investigations of the Hills' anomalous events and archival research on their UFO abduction case. And as the trustee of Betty's estate, she selected files from Betty's personal archive collection for permanent collection at the Milne Special Collections Library, the UNH Library, the University of New Hampshire, Durham, New Hampshire. And you will find her case study of the evidence in her book, co-authored with Stanton Friedman, Captured, which I have here, and you absolutely have to read it. It is really the best book on this case. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that, but there's so much to talk about. Well, you guys, Kathleen's had her own experiences, and she is an incredible researcher with a bunch of books. Since 1991, she's volunteered for the Mutual UFO Network in various positions, such as Director of Field Investigator Training, Founder-Director of MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team, and over a 10-year period expanded her ER team from 3 members to 45 trained seasoned specialists, which have attracted people of pretty high caliber, people with PhDs and MDs, psychological and research consultants, and additionally, she sat on the Edgar Mitchell Free Advisory Board. And during this time, she worked on 3 studies of, get this, nearly 5,000 experiencers. So we're going to be talking to someone who knows more about contact than pretty much anyone else in this field. I mean, she's really that experienced. Now, let's see. What else do I have here on her bio? She's presently working on the Marden-Barton Survey of Religious Belief and Extraterrestrial Life, which is available on her website. She has appeared as an on-camera commentator on, wait for it, 55 television and video productions. Wow, Kathleen, I'm so impressed. Additionally, she has spoken on innumerable radio shows and podcasts and has lectured across the U.S. and to audiences in foreign countries, and has authored and co-authored numerous books and articles in UFO magazines and journals. 2 of her books are available in foreign languages. She's the recipient of 2 major awards, including one from MUFON and the other from the International UFO Congress. And some of her books include The Alien Abduction Files, Forbidden Knowledge, Extraterrestrial Contact, Science Was Wrong, Fact and Fiction and Flying Saucers, True Stories of Alien Abductions, Making Contact, and more, some of which were co-written with such people as the amazing Denise Stoner, a previous guest on the Lightgate, and of course the iconic Stanton Friedman. I really want to talk about your work with Stanton Friedman because he's such an amazing pioneer in this field. But let's just get you in the room, Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hello and happy birthday to both of you.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm just so humbled and excited that you agreed to come on the show.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so great to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I have been following your stuff for a long time and watching you on podcasts because you're one of the more watchable guests, I think. Always something new. Love your book. You know, you have so much information.
And I have an update on that, a 60th anniversary update.
Oh, yeah?
Ooh, yes.
Do share.
Pardon me?
Oh.
Please share.
Yeah, what's it?
Okay, well, this is what it looks like. You can
Oh,
see
nice.
60th
wow.
anniversary.
Oh,
I
it's been
see.
updated. Oh,
Okay.
cool.
Okay,
Right.
and new scientific analysis of the evidence. I've never stopped looking for scientists to evaluate the evidence. And as the trustee of Betty's State, I'm in charge of that, and she appointed me spokesperson for her. And so there have been 2 new scientific studies on Betty's dress with some really exciting outcomes from those scientific studies.
Wow.
One of them was a DNA analysis of the lining of Betty's dress.
Oh, wow.
And we took the samples from the area where her navel would be, right around the waistline. And as we examined, I was with Ben Hansen doing a television show up at the University of New Hampshire at the archival collection where the dress sits today. And so we were looking at the spots on the dress, and he thought they looked like blood, maybe. Now, remember, this is in the area of the dress where Betty claimed there was a needle inserted into her navel. So was fluid or blood weeping from her navel when she put that dress back on? Well, Ben examined the dress from the outside, and he saw that this fluid had not passed through the exterior of the dress. It was only on the lining. So it meant that it came from the inside, not the outside. She didn't spill a drink or something, in other words. So I sent the sample, and I had a disc with Betty's blood sample as well, off to a laboratory for DNA analysis. And the result was that they discovered that it was fluid from Betty's body that was the source of that DNA stain. So that was really big news.
Wow.
I thought that was
Very cool.
that could
confirm. Yeah.
It suggests that her memory of the needle in the navel was true.
Amazing. Wow.
Yes.
Amazing.
Well,
So
we do
that
have a
was,
lot to talk about, don't we?
yes. And there was some rare and very expensive metals with a very high burning melting point on the front of her dress. Well, I actually took samples from 3 different areas of that dress for scientists at a major university.
Wow.
In the chemistry department. And so that underwent analysis and just I don't know if you'd call it the smoking gun or not, but it's pretty substantial evidence that how else could these very rare, one of those metals is extraordinarily rare in the Earth's crust, but abundant in the universe.
What metal was that? Do you remember?
Tellurium.
Okay. All right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yes.
That's
That is
really interesting.
Yes.
That is absolutely fascinating.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Okay. Well, gosh.
There's a lot more in that last chapter too that I
All
added.
right.
Boy,
Like
yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
when you were in the green room and we were beginning to start the show, I always love to hear about how people were introduced into this subject. And of course, you're part of this whole iconic pioneering event, which changed the world, changed the way we all think about this subject. I mean, changed everything when it comes to UFOs. So I know that that's part of your story there, but I'm curious, growing up as a little kid, did you believe in UFOs? Did you have experiences? How did this all bring you up to where you are today?
I had never heard of UFOs when I was a little kid. The first time I ever heard of flying saucers is when I arrived home from school. I was 13 years old. I was in the 7th grade, and my mother was on the phone with my Aunt Betty, whom we called Eunice. Her real name was Eunice Elizabeth. So she was on the phone, and my mother had her ironing board set up, and she was a chain smoker, so it was the cigarette in one hand, puffing away and flicking the ash, and I'm sure Betty was doing the same thing on the other end. And so my mother was concerned. She was listening to Betty, and my mother said, well, I'll call our neighbor. And then my mother hung up the phone. And I was really curious about why she wanted to call our neighbor, who was a physicist. And my mother said that Eunice and Barney had flying saucer sighting that came so close to them the night before that Betty was concerned about cosmic rays and radiation and that sort of thing. They felt contaminated when they arrived home. They felt very clammy was the word that they used, much more so than they would have felt if on any drive from just west of Montreal home.
Right.
And so that was, I immediately became curious because I'd learned in school a little bit about the planets, but I thought that they were not inhabited. And so it was, wow. And of course, my favorite book was Nancy Drew. So I was, the little girl, 13-year-old detective, and I was very good at science, wanted to grow up to be some sort of scientist. And so I was excited. I wanted to learn all I could. And it was that day that my mother told me that she had seen a flying saucer a few years before that. It was a very large cigar-shaped one that was hovering over a field, and there were smaller ones that flew around it. And it was a multiple witness sighting.
Oh, amazing.
So, but I had never heard of it. That was in New Hampshire, yes. Yeah. We lived about 20 miles away from Betty and Barney. They were in Portsmouth on the seacoast, and we were in Kingston. So that's where I grew up. And So my mother told me about that, and that was more interesting. And boy, I wanted to go down to Betty's and Barney's house and talk to them myself. And so I was the impetus behind pushing to get down there as soon as possible. And my father decided that he would acquiesce to my request and take us down there. So he took off from work early. And something that I didn't mention about that conversation my mother was having is that my mother did call that physicist. And for some reason, he said, tell Betty, if she has a compass, take it out to the car and see how the needle reacts.
Right.
Now, we know when you put it around the battery, the needle is going to react. But when she went out with the compass, she noticed these new spots on the trunk of the car. They were all about the size of a quarter or so. They were perfectly round and very shiny. They hadn't discolored the paint. They were just very shiny. And the trunk of the car was blue. It was a two-tone 1957 Chevy Bel Air. So she went out, she held the needle over these spots that hadn't been there the day before, and the needle rotated wildly. It would just spin and spin. And Barney went out, did the same thing for him. And so that raised my curiosity too. I had to look at those spots. So I did when we went. I heard the story directly from Betty's mouth. My father sat quietly in a corner of the room with Barney, who was expecting a phone call from Pease Air Force Base. They'd already made a report, but the officer Henderson said that he would call back if he had more questions. So Barney was expecting this phone call. My father later told me that Barney talked to him, and he said Barney's memory was very clear at that point. And he talked to him about the non-human entities that he observed through the windows of that craft when he was standing in the field. Mm-hmm. Now, in the original reports that I have, I read about this many years later, of course. And in those original reports to NICAP, he described how he could see them with and without his binoculars. That's how close the craft was, estimated 100 feet above him, about 50 feet away.
Amazing.
Yes. So it was absolutely fascinating. And I had the opportunity to watch as all of this unfolded, the impact that it had on Betty, the impact that it had on Barney, which was much, much worse than Betty, and how it changed Barney completely from being just a happy-go-lucky, joking kind of uncle that we really enjoyed spending time with, to someone who became deeply troubled about this incident because of his conscious memory of all of this, and the missing time, the 2 hours to 3 hours of time that they couldn't account for. And they would drive up to the White Mountains and drive along that close encounter route time and time again. And they would always look for that dirt road that they ended up on it, where they saw tall trees all around and a fiery orb that appeared to be sitting on the ground and a roadblock. They had conscious recall for all of that.
It's pretty courageous to do that, actually.
to go up and look again. They were seeking answers too.
Right. They were trying to ignite their memory. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And, initially Barney said, forget about it, Betty. Don't tell anyone. No good can ever come out of this. And in a sense, he was right. He wanted to just forget about it. He didn't want to face it. Betty did. She was very curious. And I think that probably because Barney had this strong desire to just forget about it. It is what caused his bleeding ulcers and his anxiety that finally led him to Dr. Benjamin Simon.
Right, because Aussie Jen is asking, and thanks for the little super chat, did they become sick after contact?
Betty told me that they both developed respiratory problems after that and had periods of pneumonia that they hadn't had previously. Also, I should mention that the dog who was traveling with them, Delcy, who was a little dachshund, ended up with a fungus infection on her skin. She was fairly new to Betty, so Betty didn't know if she'd had one previously. But there could possibly be a link between the pink powdery deposit on Betty's dress and the fungus infection on Delcy's back. Also, Betty was sleeping alone at night because Barney was working the late shift overnight at the U.S. Post Office in Boston. But Betty told me that Delcy was having nightmares, that she would yip and her little legs would run. And this was something new for Delcy.
Wow. And Betty was having memories already too, in terms of dreams, right?
She had 5 dreams. And in those dreams was information that they had conscious recall for. But then to fill in some of these dreams, there was information for which she didn't have any memory. So she ended up taking notes about all of those dreams. And then in November, she ended up typing out like a 5-page paper of her dream memories.
Wow. And ended up being pretty accurate in comparison to the hypnotic recall.
There were parts that were accurate. I did a comparative analysis of their separate statements during their entire trip as part of the research I did as a social scientist. And what I discovered is that there were many times when Betty and Barney, under hypnosis, and I remember that Dr. Simon reinstated amnesia at the end of each session, and he hypnotized them separately. One was in a waiting room with bombastic music playing, so that person could not hear what the other was saying. But Betty and Barney, under hypnosis, were describing the same things in different locations, the number of entities, how they walked, how they approached the vehicle. And that was different than her dreams. And I wrote about that in Captured. I've just posted a new article on my website. The Betty and Barney Hill dream transference hypothesis is obsolete. And I talk about why that is. And I have quoted Barney's hypnosis in it. I've done comparative analysis, and you'll read that on that, just a free article. I've been posting a lot of articles on my website. So I just find it fascinating that there's that. And also the entities that Betty described from her dreams looked Italian or Spanish. They were like Southern European, black hair, thick black hair, eyebrows, human features. Their skin was a little grayish toned. They had large noses in her dreams. They had regular lips. They were wearing cadet hats. They were dressed in blue cadet suits.
Wow.
If you read that article, I show a comparison of some artwork I did on her dreams versus what she remembered observing through after she was hypnotized. So a vast difference there.
Very interesting. Now, they were never planning on going public with this. Is that right?
That's true. she was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. He worked for the post office, but also they were involved in community affairs. They had worked together through the U.S. Office of Economic Opportunity to set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program. They were involved in civil rights. Barney was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights as a representative for the state of New Hampshire in 1965. They worked for voters' rights, and Barney received an award from the Archdiocese in the state in the city of Manchester, New Hampshire, for setting up a literacy program for illiterate people in New Hampshire so that they would be able to pass the literacy test in order to vote. You had to do that in that time frame. So, very civically involved and certainly committed to that. So they had no desire to have this story go public.
I can see why. Yeah, then what happened? I mean, because they did go public eventually, right?
It did go public. They had researchers, UFO investigators, military people coming to their house, people from the military who were giving them support secretly. And because they told the family, we were all sworn to secrecy. They told their close friends. They told members of the church, the couples club, and the minister. And they had a conversation with officers from Pease Air Force Base, the minister's home as well, trying to figure out what those buzzing sounds, the code-like buzzing sounds were that struck the trunk of the vehicle, that caused the car to vibrate, and this tingling sensation to pass through their bodies. And Dolly, I'm sure that you're familiar with that.
Yes, ma'am.
And that happened just before Betty and Barney sort of lost track of everything, and the 2 hours to 3 hours of missing time ensued. So, there was just so much going on when I was growing up, and I met the scientists who were coming. But anyway, how did it get out into the public beside what I said? Well, one of the wife of one of the military officers knew the story. She became friendly with Betty, and after they had hypnosis, and so these military officers knew the story. She went and talked to a newspaper reporter, John Luttrell, about it. And then he began his own investigation. He contacted Betty and Barney, and they refused to talk to him and said, "Don't write about it. You do not have our permission. This has to remain confidential." So he just went on and did his own investigation. He contacted military officers at Pease, at Project Blue Book. He talked to people at NICAP. He talked to a great number of people. He did a very thorough investigation of Betty and Barney, of their character, of the cover-up. He was aware of that. He wrote about it in 5 original articles that appeared in the Boston Traveler in late October 1965. And but he treated Betty and Barney with great respect. He even wrote of 6 witnesses in those articles, witnesses to the craft that night. And by the time Stanton Friedman wrote to him later, in the 1970s, he had been in contact with 12 to 14 separate witnesses who on that night were standing in different locations but saw that craft in the same location where Betty and Barney were at that particular time of night. And he knew this because he drew lines between those witnesses and where Betty and Barney were, and they intersected.
Did you look at that? Wow.
Yeah, it's just amazing the amount of evidence that has been ignored or dismissed as not being significant, that I, as an investigator, find highly significant.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so did Stanton.
Corroborating facts, you know,
Yes.
and you have witnesses who are willing to sign truth statements about it, you know, and you can map it out and show it. That's incredible.
Yes.
That's absolutely.
And I had 2 witnesses contact me.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who were military not officers, enlisted men in Maine at a naval base in that time frame, and had been driving that night and got out of the car to observe this UFO that was heading in the direction where Betty and Barney were that night. Also, years later, I was visiting Betty, and she received a phone call from a truck driver who had been driving that night and would not identify himself. I was really excited. I wanted to do an investigation. I wanted to document all of this, and he wouldn't even give me his name. So, but I did overhear that conversation too. So there were witnesses, definitely.
That's amazing. Yeah. I didn't know that there were that many witnesses. I really had no idea. So, how did it go from, you know, this being a newspaper story to suddenly, you know, John Fuller writing a full-length book about it? And were they happy with the book? And how did that all roll out?
Okay. So what happened is that after John Luttrell wrote those newspaper articles, and I have to say, Barney and Betty were so distressed over that. We met as a family and made a family decision about how to proceed with all of this. And so we decided that since the cat was out of the bag, so to speak, that Betty and Barney should speak about their sighting, but not their abduction. So they did speak a few days later, in early November of 1965, at the Unitarian Church in Dover, New Hampshire. It was a cold, freezing, rainy night. The church was packed there. The basement of the church was packed. There were loudspeakers set up for people who couldn't fit into the church.
Wow.
And they were introduced by a public information officer from Pease Air Force Base. And he talked about all of the UFO sightings they had had in that particular area of New Hampshire. And then he introduced Betty and Barney, and they talked about their UFO sighting. And John Fuller was there. John Fuller was there and approached them. He took them out to dinner that night, and he made a proposal about writing a book about what had happened to them. It was quite a long time before they were willing to sign a contract. Benjamin Simon, Dr. Simon, had to be included in this book as well. They would all share the proceeds from this book. And so they permitted John to write this book. And as a professional author, not a UFO investigator, and because of his publisher, he was forced to embellish the story somewhat, to add tension to the story.
Editors. Okay.
Such as you read about a scene in upstate New Hampshire, Colebrook, where Betty and Barney stopped for a cup of coffee and a snack after they left Canada. And you talk about, hear about these people, young people who are playing pool, who were kind of hostile toward a couple, an interracial couple, how Barney was feeling uncomfortable and all of that. That was quite embellished.
What a shame.
Yeah. Also, Barney did not stop the car when the craft was hovering above it and go to the trunk and take the gun out from under the tire well and then, or no, he actually, in that book, it wasn't even a gun. It was a tire jack. That's what it was. That didn't happen. Barney had that gun on the seat with him because their first stop was at the Mount Cleveland picnic area. Now, there were picnic barrels there full of trash, and Barney was walking the dog, and he and Betty were looking at this craft through binoculars, and Barney knew that there could be bears in the area. Now, he didn't want to worry about a bear attack. So he had that gun on the seat of the car. He took it out of the trunk when they stopped at the Mount Cleveland picnic area, which was miles north of that close encounter field in Lincoln, New Hampshire. It was just south of Twin Mountain.
Wow.
And north of Franconia Notch, where they had their close encounter.
So what about the movie?
When they had, wait, I gotta ask this.
Okay.
When they had the big meeting at the Unitarian Church, and all those people were there, did the National News Service pick up on that at all?
I don't believe they did. I could be wrong, but I don't have any newspaper articles
Wow.
about.
Because it's curious that two people from the military introduced this, and nothing in the national news got picked up. Okay,
right. But maybe it did. Maybe it did. But John Luttrell's story had just come out, and that sold so many copies. I mean, it was incredible. I have copies of that article all the way from Australia.
Oh,
that's how far that news traveled.
Wow.
All across the United States and to foreign countries.
So it went viral, as we would say today.
It was viral, yes, absolutely.
Now, when the movie came out, how did they feel about that? That must have been surreal to watch something like that.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, Barney died from a massive cerebral hemorrhage in 1969.
Oh.
Yeah, February of 1969. And so Betty was alone and under attack when the movie came out, under attack by Philip Glass and his cronies, who were attempting to dismiss all of it and had convinced at that point possibly Dr. Simon to join him in this dismissal for the sake of the American people, not to be the psychiatrist who frightened everyone to death. So, but concerning the movie itself, well, James Earl Jones did a wonderful job capturing Barney. He was a little more emotional, but theatrical license, I guess you have to be in a movie. It was not accurate. It was less accurate than The Interrupted Journey because it gave the impression that Betty and Barney had no conscious recall of having the craft hovering close overhead. It gave the impression that they had just, seen this light in the sky and that they were frightened and Betty had dreams.
Yeah. Electromagnetic resonance, like an MRI, can mess with your memory. It can knock you out. There are people who have MRIs and they come out and they really don't remember being in the tube at all. And that's because it's a magnet on your brain. And it messes with you that way. So I'm not surprised that they don't have a conscious memory of that at all, especially if they were that close,
Yeah, but they did have conscious memory of that.
Of him hovering?
Betty and Barney actually did have conscious memory of all of that. All of that.
All
but the movie gave you the impression
Oh,
that they
okay.
had far less conscious memory than they actually had.
That's weird. That
Yeah.
is weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Overall, I thought it was a pretty well done movie.
It was a very good movie. Estelle Parsons did not capture the feisty Betty. Betty had great self-esteem. She was highly intelligent, as was Barney. His IQ was 140. And Betty was, Estelle was playing a little, 50s little woman without any power, totally devoted. Oh, yes, Barney. Oh, oh, Barney, that sort of thing. I don't know. It was, it wasn't Betty.
I heard
to
they're doing
me.
a remake on this.
Yes, I heard they might have been, but I haven't heard anything at all about it lately.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if they are or not.
Wow. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So what point did you start? I mean, you started researching this from the beginning, but when did it become something really, a central part of what you do? I mean, this has become a big part of your life.
Yes, it has. After college in New Hampshire, I moved to Cincinnati because my first husband had a full scholarship to study for his doctorate there. And so I was busy doing other things. Betty would come to visit. I was always in touch. We would always go back to New Hampshire for the summer. So I was very much in touch with Betty in that time frame. And actually, I don't know if I mentioned, I lived with Betty when I was in college for a while.
Wow.
Too. So I was very close to the story, meeting investigators who were coming, scientists. I met Marjorie Fish. I had dinner with Dr. Benjamin Simon and I think it was John Fuller and a scientist who was there as well. So I was sort of there all the way through this, but I didn't actually begin to do a formal investigation until 1991 when I joined the Mutual UFO Network and trained to become a field investigator. Now, before that, I spent a lot of time with Betty because I was back in New Hampshire again by 1984, I think it was.
Wow.
So spent a great deal of time. Betty was my mentor. She was teaching me everything she knew about the field. I wrote my first paper in, I believe it was 1991. It was a 17-page paper on their experience. I'd written one in high school too, but it was fictitious. I fictionalized their names anyway. So anyway, from 1991, once I joined the Mutual UFO Network, I started that formal investigation and research. And Betty gave me her hypnosis tapes, and I transcribed all of them. And I would tell you, I was a slow typist. I was never a good typist, but I finally finished it word for word, all 10 hours of tapes. And then I was able to do my comparative analysis on their separate statements, that I talked about earlier in the show. And eventually, I was writing the manuscript for this. I had the reports from Betty's files, hours and hours of speaking with her, interviewing her, going up along the close encounter route, going to the abduction site time and time again, looking for any way that this could have been a mistake. Didn't really happen. I couldn't find, in the end, after I did everything, I was even more convinced that this was real, that this had happened than I had been previously. So even my husband and I later on, this is after Stanton and I wrote Captured, the first edition of it. My husband and I went along the close encounter route, stopping at the stops, not just the close encounter route, the trip from to Niagara Falls up to Toronto, on to 112 miles west of Montreal, where we spent the night, just as Betty and Barney had, on to Montreal the next day, retracing their footsteps, leaving Montreal at the time that they left, driving back to New Hampshire, stopping in Colebrook where they stopped, and following that route. I, by that time, had memorized the hypnosis tapes. So as we were driving along on those old roads, we weren't taking the new highways. We were taking the roads Betty and Barney traveled on. I was observing the landscape. I was observing everything that Barney had described to Dr. Simon as they were going along, and also observing things that Betty had observed and described as well. So it was really something. And one of the debunkers had said that Betty and Barney must have been hallucinating by the time they saw that UFO, because they were so tired from driving all of those hours. And my husband and I were about 20 years older than Betty and Barney were at the time of their encounter. And we weren't hallucinating. We didn't see anything either. We didn't see a craft.
Skeptics will go to ridiculous lengths.
They will, I'll tell you. But, you know, I do that kind of thing. I have taken every argument that the skeptics have presented, and I have analyzed it. I've done experiments with it, and I can refute all of those arguments.
I'm curious.
Let me just say this real quick. I just want to, it's more of a comment, because I just can't imagine what this world would be like if Betty and Barney hadn't come forward. I mean, if you hadn't gone over there and, you know, been a whole part of this, I mean, this could have turned out, we would not be talking here today about UFOs. UFOs would not be the popular subject they are today without Betty and Barney Hill. I mean, it's just, let's face it, because they were the ones who brought everyone else, you know, into the fold, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had so much evidence, but then Travis Walton, Charlie Hickson, and Calvin Parker, they came along. But it would have been known about much later, like years later.
Sorry, Dolly.
Now I'm very curious, okay?
Okay.
I want to know, you've had all these hours with Betty, and she's had to talk. I know when I'm talking about my experiences or things that went on with me, I have it's like two people at once trying to communicate. One is the actual events and the technical parts of everything, and then the other one is the emotional me and how I feel about it. Okay, and I'm curious, how did Betty's overall feeling about all this and how it impacted her, and did she feel like she had a path to follow now after this? I'm just curious about her emotional evolution through the whole thing.
Well, initially, she was extraordinarily curious. She checked the first book she'd ever read on UFOs out of the library, the Portsmouth Public Library. There was an address in it. That's why she wrote to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena to make a report. So we have that as evidence too, what she wrote on September 26, 1961. As time went on, Betty was highly intelligent and curious, and she just kept looking for evidence. She talked, as I said earlier, to a lot of people in the military who knew that these craft were real. And as time went on, she began her own experiments. She wanted to know everything she could know. So when I began my own experiments, it was done with the knowledge that it could destroy my reputation. Because they were unorthodox. It did destroy Betty's reputation. She was doing unorthodox experiments, and somehow even ufologists thought that the video that she was taking of those craft were just something else, something prosaic. What they didn't know is that in Betty's files, I have a letter from the photo analysts. They were analyzed And Betty was using a very good video camera. And those, I don't think, were explainable. The patterns, the formations that I have in my personal files, because I have a personal copy of everything I donated to the University of New Hampshire and more, because all of my research files are there as well. So, she, over time, as she grew older, I took care of her when she was dying of cancer, the promise I'd made to her when I lived with her years earlier. And she, as she was reflecting on what occurred, she said that she was pleased to have met astronauts from another planet. Very pleased about this. Very pleased about the opportunities she had to speak with scientists who believed that this occurred, to people from the government, to military officers who believed her as well. So that was a plus. But then she was still frightened. She still had this underlying fear. And I never, ever knew this until she was one night, because I was staying at her house, and she insisted that I close all of the blinds immediately. And she thought they might be looking in the window. So that was what made her feel fearful. But something might have happened that night too, because I was.
Because that's
I was
in your book.
Yes, yes. That is in my book. My husband and I were sleeping upstairs, and we had a baby monitor between our bedroom and her bedroom, and we heard her. We heard a sound, a buzzing sound, kind of sound, and then we heard her say, "I never thought I'd see you again." And I wanted to get up out of that bed. I wanted to go down those stairs, and I couldn't move. I just couldn't move. And the next thing I knew, we were waking up in the morning. So something might have happened that night. There was another time where she apparently had a visitation, where her daughter was staying with her. I had a reprieve. I could go home with my husband. And I would go in every morning to help her daughter, Connie, who is now deceased, out. And that morning, they were both still dressed in their night clothing, which they never were when I arrived at 8 a.m. The blinds were still drawn, but the back door was open and the screen door was closed. And Betty had fallen and she had broken her arm. And she was in a cast and a sling. And it was a soft cast. And the cast and the sling were on a chair across the room. And she had no idea how that got there. It was folded. But Betty couldn't walk. She had lost the ability to walk. That's why she fell. She insisted that she was going to get up and walk. Wow. And she did, and she fell down and broke her arm.
Well, there you go. I mean, that sounds like a visitation. How else could that happen?
Right. And then her cat, who was always by her side, suddenly became really fearful of Betty. She hid under the bed for a week. I recorded all of this in my diary. And then whenever she entered the living room from the bedroom, she would skirt the perimeter of the living room to go out to the kitty litter box and her food. She wouldn't go near Betty. She would just look at her like she was terribly frightened,
Hmm.
which was so unusual for that little cat.
I've heard this in other cases, actually, same sort of thing.
Hmm.
Wow. You know, Kathleen, we do have to take a quick station ID. I've got
Okay.
some other questions I'd love to ask, and I, of course, want to get into some of your books and your own experiences and research.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, we're going to have you back on again if you're willing, because,
Sure.
oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
All right, I want to let you all know that you are watching The Light Gate. I'm Preston Dennett. My lovely co-host is Dolly Safran. Our guest tonight is Kathleen Marden, co-author of the book Captured, all about the Betty and Barney Hill story, and of course, many other books, which we will be talking about. And we've talked about how Kathleen was there when Betty and Barney Hill came home from their amazing encounter and experienced all of it right along with them, talking about it and talking to reporters, and it eventually hitting the public in the movie and the books and everything about it. So that's what we've been talking about so far. It's so fascinating. But I do want to let you all know that we are streaming live on 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. That is the UPN, United Public Radio Network, and also the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM from New Orleans. Also, of course, on YouTube. And we are on Roku too. So if you have Roku, you can check us out there. Facebook as well. So yeah, we are streaming on many, many platforms. We're pretty excited about that. And we still have one more hour left with Kathleen. We're going to get to your questions, I promise. I'm putting little stars next to them. But yeah, there's just no way we're going to be able to cover everything. But we'll do our best, guys. We will definitely do our best. Okay, I think that's it. So Kathleen, I had this question about, that was also in your book. It was just this incident that was super intriguing to me, that I think, if I remember this correctly, Betty came home one day and there was something on the table from inside a little pile of leaves that hadn't been there before. Do you remember? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
I'd love
I
to hear
have
about
those earrings. Well, Betty and Barney had been out that day, and they arrived home at night, went into their home, which had been left locked, turned on the light, and there on the dining room table were some withered leaves that hadn't been there. They hadn't put them there. And so they walked over to those leaves, and Barney picked them up to throw them away. And in those leaves were the earrings that Betty had been wearing on the night of their encounter. Now, Betty told me that she didn't even realize that they were missing. And my grandmother had made those earrings for her. They were like blue melted glass, screwback earrings, not pierced earrings. And so there they were. And I remember that Betty and Barney then came to my house, and spoke to my father, because Barney was going to install new deadbolt locks on those doors. And so we went down there, and my father helped Barney install those new deadbolt locks.
Wow.
Amazing. So
That is amazing.
you must have just returned the earrings. I mean, what other explanation is there?
Yes. You know, it's happened in other cases.
That's amazing. And just lends more credibility to the fact that she didn't even remember. It's like, wow. I mean, these little details, I find them so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Okay. I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about, Betty, before we move on to some of your own research?
Well, why don't we move on? We don't have a lot of time left.
All right. Well, let me just flash up some of your books real quick, because you have quite a few of them, and I want to let people know about some of these books, certainly. Here's the Alien Abduction Files, which you wrote with Denise Stoner, who is such a wonderful lady, by the way. We really enjoyed having her on the show.
Really?
So these are cases you investigated personally with her?
Yes. I've investigated all of the cases personally,
All right.
and she wrote parts of her story for the book, which is sort of the major, like 1/3 of the book. Then I wrote about a case that I investigated when I lived in New Hampshire. I live in Florida now. For another third of the book, intergenerational contact case, very compelling with evidence. And then on the third part of the book were several additional cases that I had investigated.
All right. So this is called the Alien Abduction Files for those of you who can't see it. It's a beautiful cover. Would you mind talking about one or two of those cases, or one that catches your interest?
Well, already know about Denise's case. So one of those cases I talked about was in the last third of the book was Tom Reed's case.
Oh, wow.
Yes, that's in there. The case of Debbie and Audrey Hewins, two women from Maine, are in there. A case about a man in Australia who communicates with extraterrestrials.
Is this the one that had an interesting connection to you?
Yes, Paul Hamden.
Oh,
yeah, that's in there.
I would love to hear about how your meeting with him ended up with you having an experience.
Yes, I'd love to talk about that.
Oh, good.
And I wrote about that in Forbidden Knowledge. And I believe I wrote about it in Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, too. But anyway, I had been, after an encounter that I had in the early 19, I guess late 80s, early 90s, something like that. But I had ETs enter my home and had a lot of physical evidence. And I ended up sick. I ended up with hair loss, extreme weakness, weight loss. My doctor told me that he thought I'd been exposed to radiation. He didn't know how, but he saw this occasionally from people in our area. And so I became ill. I became extraordinarily ill. I had to leave my profession. I was disabled. It caused neurological damage. I couldn't remember even the names of the shrubs in my front yard. I couldn't remember how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in sequential order. Yeah. I was very brain damaged from this. I had no balance. It was really very, very bad.
Do you remember the entire experience?
When that happened?
Yes.
No, I don't remember that entire experience. No.
Wow. I'd like to know about that.
I remember them coming into my room that they had shut my husband off, so to speak. I remember a lot of things that I don't talk right about too, but not everything.
Okay.
They made a mistake.
All right.
Bud Hopkins hypnotized me about this. I recall that they had put some kind of gel on my body that I think they were trying to treat the damage that was done. And I think that it was done accidentally. And it was probably from, I don't know, radio microwave or electromagnetic radiation, some kind of radiation, I suspect, because of the hair loss, the weight loss, everything else. But then, there was that brain damage that occurred as well.
Did you have a physical examination by a doctor? I mean, were they able to identify the type of radiation?
No, the doctor did not recognize that. It was my general practitioner. Oh. And he was just sort of trying to figure out what was going on.
Did they give you iodine?
I
they
did
treat-
not receive iodine, I don't think. No. I didn't tell him about the craft. I
Uh-huh.
didn't tell him I was an experiencer. I didn't want to end up committed,
Wow. Wow.
you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So, you know, he'd always known me as just a normal person with children, and that I was happily married, that had a stable job, that everything was great. And then suddenly, so he was looking for, you know, anything, but he couldn't figure out what was going on. And I became sicker and sicker, and then it started to recede.
Right.
And I ended up with an immunologist who was treating me.
Right.
And so they gave me this diagnosis of chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome eventually, because it had some of those symptoms eventually. But I was writing, I was speaking at conferences. Whenever I would go to speak, immediately, you know, after dinner, I would go to bed. I was sick. I was so weak. When I arrived home, I'd spend days just laid out, attempting to recover. And finally, we were working on MUFON's experiencer survey. We started this in 2013. No, 2000. Denise and I started one in 2012 at 13. That was the first. Then I worked on Freeze. But then MUFON's was from 2015 to 2018. So one of the people that took the survey was Paul Hamden from Australia. So I was contacting people and interviewing them. And I interviewed Paul. And he started telling me that he had the ability to speak with extraterrestrials. And, you know, I was quite skeptical. I was still just coming out of the nuts and bolts period in that time frame. So Paul said, would I like to speak with this little entity, Keek, who speaks through him? And he said that he was a medium. And so I said, yes, I would. So we set up a meeting via Skype, and we went through this, and I spoke to Keek several times, actually. And finally, I was going to myself, is this real or not? So I said to Keek, you know, I've been very ill since I was taken many years ago. And now I'm speaking and I'm writing and I'm having so much difficulty. Will you please heal me? I hadn't been healed before that. I was getting better, but I certainly wasn't completely healed, and didn't expect it to happen. But it was 3 or 4 nights later that I woke up in my bed with some of the worst pain I'd ever experienced in my life. And it was just deep, deep pain in my torso, in my organs. And I woke my husband up and I said, Charlie, I think you're going to have to either take me to the hospital or call an ambulance. I don't know what's going on, if I'm having a heart attack or what. And so he said, well, just give it a minute and we'll see what happens. The next thing I knew, I was in a new environment. I was on a table. I know that I was lying down on my back. In my peripheral vision, I could see 2 entities, one on each side of my head. And they were tall. They weren't the little grays. I think they were tall, because I don't know how high the table was. But they seemed to tower above me, and they were glowing. And I was wondering, you know, just confused. Where am I? What are you doing? I was still feeling that pain. And so they produced, and I'm still not sure if it was a vision, if it was a hologram, or if it was just some kind of a screen I was looking at. But I could see my body. I was lying down on my back, and I saw these little like bots going all through the periphery of my body. And one of my organs was colored pink, I could see, and another organ was green. And then the next thing I knew, I was back in my bed. There was like this period of like going into under anesthesia. You're there and then you're not there. You're there in terrible pain, maybe going to call an ambulance, and then you're not there. And when you arrive back, you're feeling wonderful.
Yeah.
I felt like I was 23 years old again. I had so much energy. My mind was clear. Everything was back just as it had been before. And I was so grateful to Keek and to Paul Hamden as well. So I've written about this. I've permitted Paul to write about this too. We had eventually became friends and still remain in contact from time to time. So just an extraordinary experience.
Did you tell the doctor, or did you go to the doctor after that?
I've been to other doctors. Of course, I moved. I was living in Florida at that time, no longer in New Hampshire. But I have not told my physician I'm an experiencer, even now. Although he's a big fan of watching me on TV, so he might see it on television because I've spoken of it recently. But I did tell a medical doctor, and you know about this, Preston. And that medical doctor told me that those are the organs that are involved in the symptoms that I was having. And that this chronic fatigue syndrome that they had discovered, medical researchers had discovered, was a complete loss of energy at a cellular level. And so that's what I was apparently suffering from. And because of working on those organs, those ETs had healed me.
Amazing. Yeah, I love the healing cases. There's so many of them. And they don't get near the attention they deserve.
Yeah, you wrote a great book about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm very pleased with that book because I think it is important. And I'm wondering, have you researched other healing cases?
I had a major case through MUFON. And first, I was working as an investigator. And this was a case in Canada. They didn't have field investigators in Canada in that time frame. They have them now. But I was assigned to the case. And it was a man who had a close encounter with a craft. He was an amateur astronomer. And I interviewed him. I wrote the report. And then he got back to me again. I always tell experiencers, even when they don't have any kind of concrete evidence, to keep in touch. I wrote the book Extraterrestrial Contact about how to collect your own evidence in your cases. And so he was collecting evidence. I taught him how. And so from time to time, he would send me his evidence.
Book, by the way.
Yes. And then
that's a good idea, by the way.
I wrote about his case in that book too. And he had been diagnosed with lymphoma. He had cancer. I had his medical report, which I sent to that medical doctor too. He wrote about that in Free's book that I contributed to and you contributed to. And so what happened is I think I wrote about that, maybe not, but I said to him, I will ask my ETs when I meditate to heal you. And you do the same. Ask for healing. And he always kept his cell phone with him, and he could sense when ETs were going to come into his environment. And he sensed that one night before the surgery. And what happened is he was able to capture a light orb, and it slid down the wall and flew across the room like a butterfly. It was a beautiful baby blue with kind of an ecru center.
Yeah.
Different colors. You might have seen it on YouTube. And I think that Grant Cameron showed it, and Mary Rodwell has shown it as well. But it is amazing. I've shown it at a lot of my lectures. Flew across the room, hovered over his body momentarily, and then just put down these rays and dove down into his body. He slept, fell asleep immediately, slept for the next 12 hours. When he woke up, those very large nodes on his neck that I had photographs of were no longer present. And when he went in to have his surgery, and he wouldn't tell anyone what had happened to him for the same reason I didn't, the doctors, skepticism. But they removed 4 tiny necrotic nodes, no longer cancerous, dying nodes.
That's amazing.
It was amazing.
Amazing.
Just an amazing case.
Very, very cool. Wow. All right. Gosh. So in terms of your own experiences, is it limited to what you've already told us, or have you seen UFOs?
Yes, I have. When a few times. When I was a child, in my childhood home, after this happened to Betty and Barney, and I was so excited about it, there was one hovering over my grandparents' barn.
Oh, wow.
One afternoon, I was late afternoon, early evening, I guess it was. I was yelling and screaming and jumping up and down, and I was so excited. And my mother came out and she saw it, and she grabbed me and she pulled me into the house and closed the curtains. Don't get near the windows. And so that was a UFO sighting. I had another one in, I think it was 1966. I think it was 66. I've written about it too. It's in Captured, the Rosemary sighting, where a friend of mine, a family friend, was walking home one night from maybe a quarter-mile walk to her house. And it was out in the country, pretty safe. And she was full grown by that time. And she had a craft that came down very, very low. And her purse that she was carrying started to rise into the air. And so then Betty came down and interviewed her after that. And the following week we went, I guess Betty was trying to call a craft in, and we picked up Rosemary, and Betty, my grandmother, my mother, my brother, and I drove, and we did see a craft, and we followed it, and it was fairly close. And then we saw it, my mother actually saw it hovering over the ice. And we got out of there and fast. But I saw it at about treetop level when I saw it. So that was another sighting. I don't know if we were taken that night. Boy, we arrived home late. We were all wondering, boy, time passed so quickly. I didn't think until many years later that there might have been more than a prosaic explanation for that, but I'll never know for certain. But the first time that I did have conscious recall of being taken was, I'll tell you the report that was made. My grandmother and a commercial pilot who lived down the street from us. He was returning home from work that night, and they both saw a craft coming in. It appeared to be coming in for a landing. It was hovering over the treetops. When they saw it, my grandmother was terribly frightened and hid. It left physical trace evidence on the ground. It sheared off some trees, others were bent over. It landed within 200 feet of my childhood home. It was investigated, I believe it was by a NICAP investigator.
Mhm.
I was 17. What my mother and I never told any investigator until years later was that we had memories of finding ourselves on craft that night.
Wow.
And, I was terrified. Frankly, I was terrified and traumatized. It changed me. I stopped trusting my mother because I thought she was working with them.
Oh no.
I tried to rationalize it away as that they were medical doctors who were secretly doing surgery on me in my bedroom, and my mother had arranged for them to come. Of course, I wasn't in my bedroom. I wasn't on my bed. There were these entities standing around me. It took me years to remember their faces, but I knew that they were not human. And eventually I remembered their facial features before I ever had hypnosis. Just trying to concentrate, trying to remember what they looked like.
Did they make any attempt to communicate with you when you were with them that you can remember?
Under hypnosis, years later, I remembered that they told me that they were taking tissue samples from me to test my body for toxicity, environmental toxicity. And they were very concerned about our failure to be good stewards to our environment, about the impact it was having on our bodies. Little did I know in that time frame that I lived just downstream and downwind from what ended up being a Superfund site.
Right.
No.
Yeah. And I was also 20 miles away from a nuclear base. Pease Air Force Base was a nuclear base. Also, radiation from above ground nuclear tests years earlier had traveled on the wind currents across the United States and had landed in New England, in that area. And the cows, of course, it rained, the cows ate the grass, we drank the milk. I didn't like milk, so luckily I don't have to take thyroid medicine. But a lot of people that I knew who do.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So, well, this is a pattern I see over and over again, as I'm sure you've seen before. They are very concerned about how we're treating our planet and each other, for that matter.
Yes, absolutely.
Which I think, is strong argument to say that, they're not here to take over or hurt us or scare us.
Yes. I truly believe that they're not here for that reason. They eventually, as I overcame my fear of them, they began to pass information to me. And the information, one that I remember very strongly, and I would never repeat it, except for that during these studies, people stated the same information, was that they were very concerned because our technological development was out of sync with our spiritual growth.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when this occurs, it could lead to the disintegration of life on the planet. And what I remember is that word disintegration.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was a message. And then in my latest 2 books, Forbidden Knowledge, I have a section, and it probably makes up a third to a half of the book, maybe, but it is about an experiment that I participated in after I met Kevin Briggs. I don't know if you've interviewed Kevin or not, but he's become fairly well known. I met him at the 2016 MUFON symposium that was held in Orlando, and I was a speaker there. So I didn't actually meet him there. Denise met him, Denise Stoner, because he went to the support group that she was leading. And Dr. Melanie Martin Bragg, with whom I'm now doing this survey on religious belief and extraterrestrial life, was there. Melanie met him as well. And Melanie wanted me to meet him. And so I agreed to meet him and Melanie for lunch. And I wanted it to be under the condition that Denise would be there as well. So Denise came and we met for lunch a few times and we talked. And eventually the conversation became so lively that we ended up back at my house. And that was the first time that Kevin actually channeled this information. I didn't even realize he was channeling. Melanie and Denise did.
Oh, wow.
But as time went on, I agreed to hypnotize Kevin about a UFO's encounter that he had when he was a teenager. He was a paper boy. He had memories of having these tall human-like non-humans materialize in his bathroom when he was a boy in the tub. One of them came back as an orb, an orange orb, and was behind his curtain for a week and taught him how to astral project, how to astral travel. He had a lot of fun with that. And, eventually he was sending me information that the ETs were passing to him to give to me, to give to scientists. And then Kevin asked Melanie and Denise and I to participate in a scientific experiment. I insisted it had to be scientific, and so did Denise, where we could take instruments, we could measure the environment and that sort of thing. We agreed to meet once a month on a Saturday, and we were each permitted to take questions, and we wanted scientific evidence that this was real or that this was not real, that it was Kevin's imagination or it was a hoax or something at that point. You have to consider all of those things when you're doing research of this type. So we did meet with Kevin for a year, and then we added more people to the group. There were 2 skeptics that we added. In this time frame, each all of the ones who were not skeptics, I believe, definitely Denise, Melanie, and I, and some of the members of the other group as well, were able to feel strong tingling in our bodies when the ETs were in the room. We were also, which we couldn't see, except for one time we saw a 9th dimensional, sort of as a shadow, almost angel, in the room. Also, we measured on a laser thermometer up to a 10-degree increase in the temperature around Kevin's body as he was speaking. He was drenched, and at the end of each of these sessions, from the temperature increase, not in other parts of the room, just in that area of the room. And these ETs agreed to show us evidence. We saw orbs, craft, and had one-on-one telepathic conversations with them. So it's all in the book. It is absolutely fascinating. All of the information they gave to us, 120 questions and answers. And Kevin asked me if I would be willing to put it in the book instead of just keeping it in a locked file cabinet forever, because it was so important for the public to know this, to save our planet, essentially. That was the major goal is just to save humanity, to save the animals on the planet, to save everything, to raise our spiritual consciousness, to teach us about consciousness.
That's
And
these goals.
Yeah.
You're saying them right there.
so much, plus
Right.
scientific information. It's all in the book.
I wondered if we could go to some of the questions from chat now.
Oh,
because
absolutely. Yes.
this 2 hours went real fast.
Wow. Yes.
But here's one from Fun Talks TV. And the question is, were Betty and Barney in any way indulged in meditation, psychic abilities, or past life regression? That's part one. And would they experience the whole event again if they could? That's a difficult question to answer.
They were not involved in meditation. Betty denied having psychic abilities, but I know that she had. It wasn't at will, but she did have some that would come to her. I have the same thing.
I was going to say,
I think all experiencers do.
Thank you.
Not necessarily.
Everybody has the equipment, but not everybody's using it wide open.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't have it on command, but I have these visions that come to me. And so that's the psychic ability,
Right.
sensations, that kind of thing.
Right.
Not Barney, as far as I know. So they didn't do these other things. Would they do it again? Well, Betty did do it again, but she wouldn't tell anyone. She wouldn't make it public, but it did happen to her repeatedly. And I had witnesses that I interviewed who were with her when it occurred as well. So, but Barney died. I think that he had others. One time he was behind my grandparents' house down in the backlands of the family farm, and he was missing for a long time. Everyone went out looking for him. We couldn't find him. And then finally he appeared again. And my mother said that she had observed a craft down there. Wow. So he might have been taken again as well. They did have other sightings, close encounters after this as well. But he died in 1969. So he was only 46 years old. And
so was Betty glad overall that she had this experience?
Yes, I thought I answered that question.
Yeah, that's right, you did.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, here's another question, which you may have. I'm not sure if you answered in terms of the bodily fluid on the dress. Were they able to determine what type of bodily fluid it was?
It was so degraded that they were not able to determine if it was blood, although it looked like blood to Ben Hansen, or but through the DNA test, they couldn't determine if it was blood or fluid from her body.
Oh, all right. Okay, now I know you answered this. The time of Betty and Barney's experience, you were 13, you said?
13 years old, yes.
Yeah. Okay. There was another question in here from Macon Bacon. How much actual assistance are we getting from beneficial races? Is there a Pleiadian planetary checkpoint? That one, I've never heard of that, but yeah, what would you think to this question in terms of getting assistance?
I think that they're following the prime directive in a sense, like on Star Trek, where they don't want to interfere with us very much. But it appears to me that people who are experiencers, intergenerational, are getting upgrades. You're getting genetic upgrades. In fact, the Council of Eight, through Kevin, informed us that they take us along family lines so that because of the proximity of the genetic makeup, so they can look for progress from generation to generation. So there are changes. And we do know from our studies that experiencers have been healed. They become psychic. Many experiencers develop healing abilities as well. So all kinds of
Right.
upgrades.
I'm a genetic hybrid. My family has been followed from all the way back to the beginning of time, practically. And every generation has advanced, hybridized. And when I had my DNA done, they found 8 chains that are not from here.
Oh,
And I was born psychic. They my hybridization included that, and they expected me to be who I am. So yeah, and
wow, that's
it's
amazing.
yeah.
I do not believe that I'm a hybrid. I think that I was probably taken for the first time when I was 17 under hypnosis. I said I was 3 or 4, but I've done a tremendous amount of scholarly work. I was a hypnotherapist and a quantum healing hypnosis practitioner. And according to the latest psychological studies on hypnosis, it is very good for people who are older and have biographical memories. I had no biographical memory of being taken. So I don't know if I was young or not, if it happened when I was very young. But I know that it happened when I was 17. And then I was visiting periodically.
Because, I mean, you know the pattern. It usually does start.
Yes, I know the pattern.
Has Betty's daughter been a contactee?
She was not her biological daughter.
Okay.
And so I don't believe she was. She didn't think that she was. Excuse me, my eye is burning.
Okay.
I'm having some allergies too.
It's springtime.
Yeah.
So I don't think that Connie was, because there was no genetic line there.
Okay.
Okay, here's a question from, a statement. Many experiencers, this is from Janet, and many of us experiencers come to believe that we agreed to this before we came here. What began as fear is now love and gratitude for them. Have you, because this is a controversial aspect. People are like, I didn't agree to this. And some say, well, actually, yes, I did. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that some of us did enter into an agreement before we were born on this planet. When I worked with people through the quantum healing hypnosis technique trained by Dolores Cannon and her daughter, and developed by Dolores over a 40-year period, the people that I worked with remembered this. This was part of the protocol, and they remembered. These were family members, these ETs. They didn't want to leave the craft. They were visiting with family.
Yeah.
They had volunteered to come here to try to save this planet, to try to educate humans. That's what they said. And so, yes, I believe for a lot of people, they made this agreement, but there are some people who have suffered greatly. And it's a small percentage, but still they have. And
what do you think of my labs? Do you think that's a part of this, military abductions?
I've given it a whole lot of thought, and I know military men who have been taken, some people who have had my lab abductions as well. I don't know if they made an agreement to that.
No, I mean, I wouldn't imagine they made.
I don't think so.
I don't think anybody agrees to anything like that.
No.
I think that we come here as a course. We all, there's a timeline here because we're in third dimensional gravity, and we see time because it incrementally goes so slow. We mark it.
Yes.
But outside this dimension, there's no such thing.
Right.
And ET knows, past, present, and future. They see it. It's part of their psyche. One of the things that happens to us in coming here, and it's like this all over the universe, is that we come here to learn, and we come here to evolve. It's important. If you want to stay in the third dimension for all eternity, you're going to be busy. Your karma is not going to let you out of here. That's what you determine to do for yourself. But most people want out. They want to learn all that is learnable and then get wise and leave. And every situation that happens to us, even in everyday life, even concerning the appointments of men and, all of that, is still a path that we all take, and we interact with one another. It's a giant web of interactions that we're all consciously aware of or not consciously, but we're all connected. So when you're born at a certain time, because you are born more than once, you know what you're walking into. You agree that this is going to be your lifetime. You're here for a reason. This is your path. Look for it, work hard to get there, and then move through it. A lot of people fight it once they get here. They change their mind afterwards.
I was a past life regressionist, so I've been through all of that.
So, right. And it's complicated. ETs do not interfere with us for that reason. They are autonomous beings, and so are we. They are our progenitors, okay? And their sole reason for helping us as much as they do is they are related to us. They care about us. And when we start making floppy, stupid mistakes or going in the wrong direction, they try to show or educate, but they can't interact and they cannot stop us from doing what we do. And if you want to call that a prime directive, yes. We all have, like as parents here, we teach our children the best way we can, and then we let them go. And whatever they've learned from us or somewhere else, they have to act it out on their own. And that's what we're doing. And their main objective for all of us right now on this planet, in this time frame, all of it, is for us all to wake up to that fact. Okay?
Yes.
And
I'm sorry.
To use whatever wisdom we can muster right now, because we're at a critical point and we need to do that quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do have to do that. And there are people all over the world now who are doing CE5 experiments and communicating through meditation with these non-humans. I do it 3 times a week.
Yeah, and
the meditation.
And learn this in a critical way. Stop polluting your body with toxins. Stop letting people ruin our environments, because the number one gland in our head, the pineal gland, which is part of your endocrine system, is crucial in you being able to use your abilities. And if you're toxic, you can't. And we just have to stop allowing people to poison us and poison our water and poison the earth and terrify us and scare us to death. It's very bad. And we all need to stand up and say, enough's enough, y'all. Got to stop and start trying to learn and clean up our own lives first. Okay. Stop using the bad stuff. Stop, living like plastic's the best stuff on the planet, that kind of thing. And,
very, very true. Yes, absolutely.
I don't think it's any coincidence, honestly, that Betty and Barney were social workers and doing community service.
Exactly.
I agree. Plus, they lived next to Pease Air Force Base, so if they wanted to check them for radiation, it might have been a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, we got a couple of more questions. I don't know if we can really. Maybe
we're close. We got a minute or two. Go.
Here's one from White Dragon. I've certainly got reports of UFOs being bigger on the inside than the outside, like Doctor Who's TARDIS. Have you had reports of that?
Yes, I've heard many reports of that sort of thing. It was really strange. Kevin Briggs, that I talked about, had a little craft that came into his home. And then it expanded, and then there were full-size entities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, they're capable of the most amazing things.
Yes, they are.
Sometimes science fiction becomes fact.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, we're pretty much just about to run out of time. We have a few minutes left. I do want to pop up some of your books so that people... I really wanted to talk more about your work with Stanton Friedman.
You're going to come on with us again, right?
I will. Yes.
Okay. So stand with us after the show. I'm going to get a date out of you.
With some of these books.
Okay.
Okay.
That must have been amazing. He's such a huge pioneer and such a nice man and so smart.
Was so knowledgeable.
So
it was
is there
really
anything else
an
you want
honor to work with him.
Briefly talk about? We still do have 2 or 3 minutes. Then we do have to close up the show. So I just want to give you a chance to say a last few words. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yes. Well, I want to give a plug to that Marden Barton survey. which is on my website at kathleen-marden.com. Please go there if you haven't already taken it and help us. It only has 50 questions if you're an experiencer. If you're not, only 25 questions. It's you can write in some answers if you want, but it's basically true or false or yes or no, multiple choice, that kind of thing. And we greatly appreciate it. We're going to publish a book on all of that when we finally have 1,000 participants. So that's what we're working toward. There are lots of articles that you can read on my website. I just posted one yesterday about why the Betty and Barney dream transference hypothesis is obsolete. You can read that. There are lots of articles with quotes from the original reports, lots of photographs and things that you can see on my website.
Totally
Also,
cool.
I'll be at the MUFON Symposium doing a little workshop with experiencers early on Sunday morning. And
Where was this? In Florida?
It's going to be in Irving, Texas.
Okay.
Near Dallas. You fly into the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. There's a free shuttle to the Marriott conference, the hotel. Just go to MUFON.com or MUFON Symposium.com for all the information.
Wow. Okay.
I think I put a link on my website too.
Okay.
Very cool. Well, yeah, I mean, this has been so awesome. I had so many questions we didn't get to go to, but
we're going to get them next time.
It will be fun. This was a real pleasure and very enjoyable. And Dolly, you have so much information. It's you're like a walking encyclopedia.
I know. I'm starting to realize that we're working on Symmetry 2 right now, and it's going to be a lot of work. He just started asking me questions. He had 26 questions for me at first, and we're not even halfway through that particular part of it yet, and there's more coming. So, but yeah.
And Preston writes great books.
I'll tell you something. You might or may not know this. E.T. sent me to him. My contact sent me to Preston. Absolutely. Wow. I became frustrated when I first started to come out. I couldn't find anybody that I could consider well equipped enough, to put the story out. I was very frustrated, and my contact Alada said, I know somebody, and he made me write it down. I'm on the, it's called the Place of Movement. It's like you would call it the bridge, okay? And he said, write this down. I had a piece of paper and a pen in my hand, and I wrote down Preston Dennett, YouTube, right? Mm-hmm. And I went looking for him, and I found, strangely enough, his MUFON Symposium Healings, his oldest video that he ever put out. And I listened to it, and I went, oh my God, there he is. I emailed him. He emailed me back within 24 hours, and it just went from there. So they're very well aware of who he is. So it's amazing. It really is. Yes. And I trust him with my life.
Yeah. That is wonderful that you were sent to each other.
Yeah. But you set us up in many ways, as you know. Synchronicity.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Okay. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much for coming. And I can't
it was such a pleasure.
All right, thank you. Thank you. You've been listening to The Light Gate on this Monday night. I want you all to have a great week. Everyone, please be well. Namaste. We are coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We want you to have a glorious, wonderful week, and keep meditating, y'all, and keep looking for the answers and use your abilities if you can. We love you. Night night.